Hi, this is Tisha from ISFET Archives, and you're listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 2. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here, you will find the unpredictability of old-school RPG paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and no character will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 69 begins with the party in the room with the face on the double doors. The portal is closed, and no amount of trying to get past it or searching elsewhere provides any solutions. The PCs are faced with the prospect of having to turn back, but Bazu convinces Yellowfly to at least stay in the room to rest for the night, and they do. During Catsbane's watch, the final watch of the night, the wizard makes the decision to open the doors. He has known how to do it all along, but it is not an easy choice, as it really means that he'll need to face his greatest fears. He speaks the name of the demon, and the doors open. When his companions awake, he lies to them and says it just happened. The party passes the strange threshold and enters a long, dark hallway. Almost right away, the PCs start to feel something, an unpleasant sensation, like having a weight on their hearts. Yellowfly wonders aloud what it might be, and Catsbane tries to explain that they might be departing somewhat from the prime material plane. This concept is hard to grasp for Yellowfly, so Shawnee offers one of Tamlin's stories to illustrate the idea. She shares the final revelation of Chartoon, also known as the parable of the blackness of mulberries. Shortly after Shawnee finishes recounting the parable, the party is surprised to hear faint music coming from somewhere far up ahead. Chapter 70, Part 1, Day 184. Time unknown. 3 hours of lantern fuel remain. Party status: Yellowfly, 32 of 44 hit points. Shawnee, 33 of 33. Jace, 40 of 45. Catsbane, 17 of 21. Bazu, 19 of 21. Spells available. Catsbane has memorized Detect Magic, Magic Missile, Web, Mirror Image, Haste, Slow, and Dimension Door. Bazu has prayed for Cure Light Wounds, Light, Bless, Locate Object, and Cure Serious Wounds. The companions made their way slowly along the hallway, which continued to slope downwards, towards the sound of music that grew in volume as they neared its source. The light from their lantern, held in Catsbane's free hand, was their only source of light, and soon there was nothing but the hallway before them and the hallway behind. Still they went, and the music gently grew louder. After a time, Yellowfly stopped the group. He turned to Jace. "Do you see that?" The other fighter turned to him and nodded. "Catsbane, shut the lantern, all the way." Catsbane did as he was told, and then everyone could see it. Straight ahead was a pinpoint of light that winked like a star. It was impossible to say how far away it was, as it floated in the middle of a plain of pure blackness. "Bazu," came Shawnee's voice in the dark. "Can you still sense if the way ahead is safe?" She was thinking that this light might be something similar to what they had seen in the room with the fire-breathing statues.
"The way ahead is clear of danger,"
replied the cleric. "You're certain?" asked Yellowfly. However, he received no answer from the cleric. "All right, Catsbane, open the light, and let's keep going. Everyone be on your guard." The glow of the lantern returned as Catsbane opened it partly, and the companions continued their journey deeper into the earth. For a long time, the light ahead continued to blink at them, though it was harder to see now than it had been with their light off. After a few minutes, it was joined by another light, and then another. "You see that?" asked Yellowfly unnecessarily. "I think they're candles," whispered Shawnee. Although they further slowed their pace, they did not stop. Yellowfly was determined that they would not turn back, and besides, by his way of thinking, the way behind them was likely to be more dangerous than the way ahead. "Bazu," he said.
Have faith. The way is safe for now.
Came the mild reply. As they drew closer, Yellowfly came to believe that Shawnee was right. They were candle flames. By the time he had come to this conclusion, there were more of them further along. A daisy chain of little flames, all lighting their way. They went in a line away from them, where they were consumed by darkness. Eventually, they reached the first light, but even from a distance, they could see that Shawnee had been right. There was a single candle resting atop a stanchion and cresset, right in the middle of the hall. They stopped to examine it. The muted sound of music continued to play from somewhere ahead. It was just slightly louder now, but it still seemed to come from far away. "Cold iron," said Yellowfly, touching the stanchion.
This isn't cold iron.
Jace was peering at it. Then he, too, touched it.
I'm not sure what metal it is, but it isn't iron.
The candle on top was a squat, thick cylinder of tallow. They could tell by the scent.
It doesn't seem to have burned for very long,
observed Bazu. He had a point. By the amount of melted wax, the candle seemed only to have been going for a matter of minutes. "Perhaps we should take it with us," suggested Shawnee. "Leave it where it is," said Yellowfly. Even though Bazu's magic revealed no traps in the vicinity, he did not trust that they were safe. "Someone must be down here and nearby to have lit these, and someone is playing that music." From where they were, the next stanchion, cresset, and candle were just inside their field of vision, perhaps 50 feet away. "It looks like the passage continues to drop," he continued. "Come on." The party passed by 4 more identical candles on stanchions. Like the first, they did not seem to have been lit for very long. 6 candles, mused Shawnee, having counted all of them so far. Isn't there a poem by that name? There was. Catsbane knew it, as did Yellowfly, who began to recite it. 6 candles mark the way through life's long twists and turns, from tiny infant's first breath. Catsbane picked up the second stanza.
Until the grey of age and all that wisdom learns, on the way to dusty death. It was written by Hamlet Rattlestaff.
Snorted Jace. He didn't care for poetry.
Isn't everything?
After so long moving in a straight line, it was a surprise to see the path ahead turn to the left. Beyond the turn, the hall abruptly terminated at a door of bronze. Behind it, the soft music continued to play, and louder, as though the source were just on the other side. There was a knotted rune etched into the door that Catsbane recognized as the same symbol that was frescoed into the wall in the pool room. He shuddered at the memory of the gargantuan fish he had seen, but despite that, part of him wanted to stop and look up the rune in his book, Zygog's Pantology Demonium, but he couldn't do it now. It would take ages to skim through the thousands of unfamiliar runes contained in the book's pages, and he was quite sure the others would not want to wait. He berated himself for neglecting to have done it when they had rested earlier, but that chance was gone now. Unaware of Catsbane's trepidation, Bazu held his holy symbol up to the door and pronounced it free of danger, but warned that he could feel his powers of divination were about to expire. There was no lock on the door, simply a handle of bronze, wrought in the shape of a nude woman. The miniature figure arched her back and had her hands thrown back and over her head. Her hands and feet were connected to the door. After a brief nod at his companions to ensure that they were ready, Yellowfly gripped it. His pinky slid into the small of the nude figure's back, and his thumb crossed diagonally between her breasts as he held her in his palm, and a sudden flash of hot desire ripped through Yellowfly's heart. The sensation was so strong he almost gasped, but he managed to convert the sound into a grunt of effort as he pulled open the heavy door. As soon as it opened, the music stopped, and the hallway flooded with light from within. It was bright enough compared to their own lantern light to blind them momentarily, but after a second, Yellowfly and the others found themselves looking into a vast room, illuminated by, well, it must have been thousands of candles. The place was a multi-leveled concourse of balconies, terraces, verandas, and arcades. Here and there, scattered throughout, were dozens of statues of white stone. Some stood on plinths, others had their feet on the ground or were in reclining positions. All of the statues were in pairs, a nude man and a nude woman engaged in the act of coupling. Each wore an exaggerated expression of ecstasy, some of which were so extreme as to express pain, not pleasure. It was, in short, a veritable garden of pornographic statuary.
Thessaluna's tears,
breathed Shawnee.
Sadal, defend us,
said Bazu.
What is this place?
In the absence of the mysterious phantom music, the place seemed empty, despite its population of stone nudes. It was as though some colossal orgy had been frozen in time. Even the whiteness of the statues contributed to this effect. Yellowfly stepped in, followed by the others. Catsbane averted his eyes, studied his lantern and, no longer needing it, put out the light and closed the door. There was nowhere else he could look where he would not see something obscene. Shawnee, Yellowfly, and Bazu walked in separate directions to take a closer look at some nearby statues. Jace, with his sword drawn and his face pulled down in a frown, had decided to stay. Shawnee walked over to a stone pair a dozen feet distant from the door. The figures were coupling, with the woman on her back and the man lying atop her. Their bodies seemed mismatched. The male was overlarge and had a gut which sagged onto the woman's abdomen. The woman was, by contrast, very small and... Shawnee's hand flew to her throat. The man's face was the face of Kern, her former lover, who had been slain in the cellar of the Fallfallow Inn some 6 months before. Her eyes flicked to the other face, and she saw her own, complete with a little scar on the chin. "You all right, Yumiya?" came Yellowfly's voice from a little ways off, where the fighter was inspecting another pair of intertwined stone lovers. Shawnee blinked hard and looked back at the statues. The male face was no longer Kern's, and the female's was no longer her own. She backed up a step. She must have imagined it. Suddenly something else occurred to her.
What did you just call me?
Yellowfly tore his gaze from the statues he was looking at. He had a distant look in his eyes.
What did you just call me? What?
The fighter's eyes were clear now.
"You've called me by the wrong name,"
said Shawnee.
"I did not,"
retorted Yellowfly, genuinely confused by the accusation.
"I said, are you all right? Jace, Catsbane, you heard him."
The other two men looked bemused. They had not been paying attention, they said.
"Bazu, you heard him,"
Shawnee persisted. Bazu had his back to them, so she could not see the stricken look on his face as he stared down at yet another stone couple. This pair was arranged in a position of copulation usually reserved for beasts. The face on the male statue belonged to Idmon Rith, and that of the female was the unmistakable countenance of his beloved Nality. Jace, still standing at the door, looked from Shawnee to Bazu, and, although he did not understand what troubled them, he decided for the group that they had had enough of this place.
"Let's keep moving. I don't like it here."
Bazu did a double take of his statue, and now he looked more confused than upset.
Right. Neither do I.
"Then it's agreed."
Jace didn't wait for Yellowfly to concur, but started walking ahead of the rest. He could hear them following behind as he passed through the large, bizarre area, threading between a number of statues of orgiastics engaged in various and graphic obscenities. Eventually, the statues were behind them, and the terraced topography leveled out, where it funneled into a passage roughly 50 feet wide and with a stone ceiling of equal height. The passage was not free of decoration, however. Instead of statues, it contained fountains and other water features, 5 in all, that they needed to pass on their way through. All of them worked in the sense that water, if that's what it was, poured through them. The first one was on their right. It depicted a great bearded warrior urinating on a prone man who knelt in a supplicant position at his feet. As with the statues, all of this was carved from white stone. "Do not touch anything," warned Yellowfly. The caveat was unnecessary. None of the party members had any desire to touch the fountains or to test the water. The second fountain was on their left. It was a complicated diorama showing 8 soldiers, each only 12 inches tall, standing under a grated ceiling atop which other miniature soldiers poured hot oil over their heads. The set was meant to look like the front gate of a castle, with defenders atop and invaders below. The oil being poured was not oil, of course, but merely water. Still, the expressions on the miniature faces of the victims being doused were disturbing in their realism. The companions moved on, saying nothing. The third fountain was on their right. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shallow pool or well. It was filled with still water, and there was no spout to fill it. The companions might have expected the water to be fetid or scummy, but it was crystal clear, and, as they approached, they could see that there was something in the pool. Jace saw it first, and his heart missed a beat when he laid eyes upon it. A stone figure of a man was lying on its back in the pool. It had been carved to look as though it had drowned there. The man's face was distorted, his eyes bulged, and his hair spread out in a nimbus. What shocked Jace was that this face was known to him. Dramatis Personae, Jace, 3.5 years ago. Jace was aware of both his strengths and shortcomings. He was good with the sword, decent with the bow, and loyal to a fault. On the other hand, he lacked experience, was not educated, and could not match wits with Nudge Pickens and his friends when they all got together to drink and make merry. Jace appreciated being invited to his mentor's get-togethers, but at the same time, they always made him feel inferior. He was not funny, quick, or clever. Neither could he engage in friendly debate. Nudge's friends weren't rude to him, but it was clear that they saw him only as a guard dog, someone to rush to the front if there was fighting to be done. For this reason, Jace was surprised when his mentor sent him out alone on a mission that he described as delicate. Jace was to visit a man in Mirpool named Galinar. Galinar had once done Nudge a favor, and in return, Nudge had given him a sizable loan, big enough for him to buy a boat and become a fisherman in the coastal town to the east. The loan had come due 6 months ago, Nudge had told him, and Galinar had not paid any of it back. Jace's job was to visit the man, assess the situation, and come back with money if he could get it, answers if he could not. As Galinar was a friend of the church, Jace was not to hurt him excessively, preferably not at all. Jace had also been instructed not to take any actions that would hamper Galinar's ability to make money. Putting a hole in the man's boat to make a statement, for example, was not allowed. It was a perfect summer morning when Jace arrived at the small fishing cottage, a modest construction of wattle and daub with a skiff out front tied to a stake. A net was strung between 2 other stakes halfway between the beach and the cottage, and a man with weathered skin sat on a stool before it, mending holes with a needle and string. He turned to face Jace, whose hard boots crunched over pebbles and shells as he approached. Galinar was a middle-aged man with stringy black hair and blue eyes. They narrowed at Jace.
Who might you be?
Said the man in a cautious voice.
A friend of a friend,
replied Jace.
Come to see how your business is coming along.
Not as well as I'd like,
hedged Galinar. The vague answer told Jace nothing, but judging by appearances, the little fishing operation was not doing too badly. The skiff was in good repair. There were several barrels against the outside of the cottage that Jace guessed were full of salt. He walked over to one of them and casually lifted the lid. It was packed with salted fish.
You seem to be doing well enough, as far as I can tell.
By now, Galinar had stood up. In his hand was a knife with a long, slender blade, the kind used for gutting fish. This was not going well. Nudge had sent him here to find a peaceful solution to the problem. To this end, Jace had come unarmed. His weapons were at the Turning Bull Inn, where he was planning to stay the night, before making the return trip on the next day. Jace closed the lid of the barrel and took a few steps towards the other man, who stepped back away from him until his bare feet were in the water.
What's that to me?
Galinar was starting to look twitchy. Jace had hoped it would not go this way, but it seemed intimidation was his best option now. Nudge had not forbidden that.
You owe Nudge Pickens money,
he said in a louder voice, standing tall and trying to focus on Galinar's eyes instead of his knife. He took another few steps to show that he was not afraid.
So he sends a boy?
Challenged the other.
Tell him to come get it himself.
Intimidation was not working. In fact, he had only made things worse by trying. Jace decided to change his approach. He put out his hand, palm open, intending it as a gesture of non-aggression. but Galinar must have misinterpreted it, and he suddenly rushed at Jace, snarling. Their bodies collided, and the two men wrestled in the shallows for a time, with neither gaining the upper hand, until Galinar managed to pull his blade against the back of Jace's arm. Jace yelped and tried to disengage, but the other man pressed the attack and tripped him. Now Galinar was on top of him, and Jace's head was almost fully submerged. When he gasped, he took in as much water as he did air. Blind panic gave him strength, and he twisted Galinar's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. Then he rolled the fisherman over and onto his back, so that Jace was straddling him. Now it was Galinar's head underwater. Jace put all his weight on his opponent and pushed him straight down, with his hands on the man's shoulders. He held him there for at least 20 seconds before he remembered that he was not allowed to kill the man and let him up. Galinar sputtered and coughed, kneeling helplessly in the water, while Jace, cursing, staggered back up the beach. When he reached the fishing cottage, he threw open the door and walked inside. He ransacked the place until he discovered a small coin purse hidden in a clay pot. He emptied the contents into his hand. 12 silvers and a single gold piece. Not nearly enough. He transferred the coins to his own purse and tossed the empty one on the floor. When he emerged from the cottage, Galinar was still kneeling in the water, coughing. On the way back to town, Jace reflected on his failure. Galinar had been a test. After this, Nudge would never make him a captain. He would forever be stuck in the lowest ranks of the church. Nothing more than a guard dog, after all. Jace tore his gaze away from the horrible reminder and pushed on with the others in tow. To the left was a fourth fountain. This one was designed using the ordinary conceit of a leaping fish that spouted water from its upturned mouth. But in this case, the fish was rotten. Its eyes were empty sockets, and some of its scales had sloughed off, exposing the comb of bones beneath the ruined flesh. After this, and on the right, came the final water feature. It was a pair of sculpted warriors, locked forever in the final throes of battle. One of the fighters had slit the other's throat with a hand axe, and water, instead of blood, sloshed from the gaping wound over the defeated man's breastplate and down into a cleverly concealed drain at the victim's feet, where it gurgled away. When the 5 fountains were behind them, the companions walked in silence along a plain hallway that tapered to a mere 30 feet across. The sounds of water faded away, and a new sensation took its place.
Is that?
Asked Jace.
Incense,
said Bazu from behind him. The odor was faint at first, but it grew steadily stronger as they proceeded, with their lantern throwing only enough light for them to see clearly a few dozen feet in front of them. The smell was heady, and the very air was beginning to seem hazy by the time they saw the dais. It was a 3-tiered, semicircular platform of white stone that supported a rough rectangular slab of some dark ore. Atop that, as though lying on a bed, was a figure. By the curving shape of the body, they could tell it was a woman. At first, it seemed that she might be yet another statue. She was so still. But as they drew nearer, they could detect the faintest rise and fall of her breast. Apart from that, she did not move at all. Yellowfly and Catsbane, now walking side by side, were the first to see the woman. They were struck by her beauty, but did not recognize her. When Catsbane and Shawnee saw her, they caught their breath in unison, for this woman was known to them, even if they did not know her name. Catsbane, more than the others, felt the shock, for the face was not only familiar, it was a face he had once dreamed about. Thanks for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you've enjoyed the show and would like to help to support it, there are so many ways to do so. You can recommend it online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum World Building Tool, or Encyclopedia Manticorica on DriveThruRPG. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. My sincere thanks to everyone for their support of the show. Instead of my usual review share, let me instead share a little coincidence that occurred, well, I suppose by the time you hear this, it'll be about a month ago. Later on the same day that I wrote and recorded the outro and thanks section for episode 69, that's the last episode, I noticed all kinds of action on X, and when I opened the app, I saw that the same guy whose review I had featured in that last episode had just released his own semi-actual play podcast. Now, I rarely get to return the favor when folks write reviews for me, but here was a good opportunity to do just that. I listened to the first episode of this new show, Swords Against Madness, and I just loved it. The creator is Brian Rideout, and I think he's made something very special and unique here. Brian goes for, and truly captures, the retro sci-fi fantasy vibe that puts me in the mind of Vance and heavy metal comics from the late 70s and 80s. If that's your jam, you've got to go check out Swords Against Madness. Thanks for making this new pod, Brian, and thanks also for all the support you've shown me over the years. Speaking of support, where would I be without my great cast of voice talent? This episode features the usual trio from Tumbledye Games, Kyellen, Kevin, and Andy, playing Catsbane, Jace, and Bazu. Thanks very much, guys. Also joining the cast is Robin Sampson, playing Galinar, the lone defaulter. Robin also makes a semi-actual play, and if you haven't discovered it already, run, don't walk, to your nearest podcatcher to get it. Stories from the First Watch is fantasy done just right, and I'm happy to finally get you on the cast, Robin. Thanks a million. For anyone who'd like to get in touch with me, I'm at Manticore Tale on X or Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram. And there's always email, taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. If you've got any burning questions, I am collecting them for a post-season mailbag episode. Finally, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore, the story where chaos rolls.
The Badlands. A truly God-forsaken place. You'd have to be crazy to leave the safety of Threed for its sands. Legend has it that beneath this blighted earth, something truly powerful lies dormant, calling out to any traveler brave or desperate enough to listen. One day, aboard a doomed train into the wastes, 3 strangers heed that call. A shape-shifting bounty hunter,
Strange has gone by many names, friend.
a runaway socialite,
Okay, girl, well, you just did your mascara, so no more crying for today.
and a former thief turned family man.
I promise that I will be back, and I will do my absolute best to right you.
Will our runaways find what they're looking for?
I mean, we're already here, let's have a little fun.
You really went in there, guns blazing.
I thought that was the plan.
My potions are miraculous.
I thought we were being quiet.
Oh, Stump only has 1 volume, sorry.
Wild roses grow out of his mouth, having filled his lungs.
What's happening out there?
Violence.
Find out on Mage Hand High Five, the Badlands. And just between you and me, they ain't got a chance in hell.